Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive. In the ancient highlands of Scotland, beneath the shadow of the snowy Cairngorm Mountains, the enchanted towers of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry stood silent beneath a star-scattered sky. The castle, vast and slumbering, was wrapped in winter's hush. Its stone corridors dim, its portraits dozing, and its ghosts drifting like silver dreams between the walls. But on a certain night, when the moon hung low and the wind whispered secrets through the pine trees beyond the Black Lake, something stirred in the oldest part of the castle. Something that hadn't happened in over 50 years. Their shops, a bell rang. It was not the school's ordinary bell, the one that summoned students to lessons or called them to feasts in the great hall. No. This was something far older, deeper. Its toll was soft but strange, like the sound of a brass heart echoing through time. It rang once, only once, just as the clock struck midnight, and no one knew where it had come from. The next morning, the castle buzzed with whispers. Students speculated over breakfast. Was it Peeves playing a new prank? Had the ghosts decided to rehearse some ancient song? Or, more darkly, had something from the forbidden forest found its way inside? Professor McGonagall, now headmistress of the school, stood at the high table, her lips pressed tightly as she scanned the hall. Though the students chattered and guessed, she said nothing. But when breakfast ended and the great oak doors swung open to release the throng toward lessons, McGonagall turned on her heel and strode up a side stair, her emerald robes billowing behind her. She climbed higher than the classrooms in the dormitories, past the tower where the owls nested, and beyond even the astronomy tower. At last she came to a quiet corridor few now walked, a hallway lined with ancient portraits and enchanted sconces that glowed dimly even in daylight. At the very end stood a door, a plain wooden door, dusty and undisturbed, marked with a symbol few living at Hogwarts still recognized, a phoenix in flight, wings outstretched, its tail curling into the shape of a crescent moon. McGonagall raised her wand and whispered, "Fawkes." There was a soft chime, and the door creaked open. Inside was the old office of Albus Dumbledore. Though unused for years, the room felt timeless, as if the air itself remembered the headmaster who had once worked here. The silver instruments still ticked quietly on their shelves. The great desk was cleared but polished. Fawkes's perch remained beside the window, though the phoenix himself had long since vanished to unknown skies. McGonagall walked slowly to the desk, her eyes scanning the room. It had been sealed since Dumbledore's death. Only she held the spell that could open it, and she had not done so in over a decade. Yet something about the bell's toll last night had stirred an old memory, something she couldn't quite grasp, like a half-remembered dream. She lowered herself into the chair and drew out her wand again, tapping once on the drawer beneath the desk. It clicked open. Inside was a single folded note. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted it. The handwriting was unmistakable, Dumbledore's looping, elegant script. Rear the midnight bell tolls. Follow its echo to where time once stood still. The seal will break and the test shall begin. Choose the 3 with care. McGonagall stared at the message, her heart quickening. The midnight bell, she had heard of it only once, long ago when Dumbledore had spoken in riddles late one evening by the fire. It was said to be part of a device too dangerous to be used and too powerful to be destroyed, a relic buried deep in the school, beneath spells so ancient even the founders themselves may have forgotten them. She rose swiftly, the letter clenched in her hand. If the bell had rung, then something had disturbed the device, and if the device had stirred, Hogwarts might be in grave danger. By evening, she had made her choice. James Finnegan, a bold and impetuous Gryffindor known for his talent with explosive charms and a tendency to rush headlong into trouble. Elara Moore, a sharp-minded Ravenclaw whose cleverness and calm had already saved her house points more than once. And Tobin Knotts, a quiet Hufflepuff with an eye for detail and an uncanny talent for sensing magical currents, though he was often too nervous to speak up about them. Each of the three received a mysterious summons, sealed with McGonagall's wax crest, bidding them to meet her after supper by the stone gargoyle that guarded the spiral stair. When they arrived, the gargoyle turned of its own accord, and the stair began to twist upward. James grinned. I didn't even give it a password. Maybe it wanted us to come, Tobin said nervously. Elara remained silent, her brow furrowed. She had read of this stair in an old text. It led to Dumbledore's office. But why summon them? At the top, the door creaked open, and McGonagall was waiting inside. She gestured them in, her face unreadable. You are not in trouble, she said at once, but I ask you now, what I am about to tell you must remain secret, even from your closest friends. They nodded, uncertain. She handed the note to Elara, who read it aloud. James leaned in closer, his curiosity rising. Tobin's face paled. The midnight bell? Elara whispered. Yes, McGonagall said, and something, or someone, has set it ringing again. A silence fell over the room. Then McGonagall continued. I believe you three possess the traits necessary to uncover what has been disturbed, and to stop it before it brings harm to the school. There are tests ahead, dangers even I cannot foresee, but I trust that Dumbledore chose his words with purpose. You three are the ones to begin this journey. James grinned, fire in his eyes. Tobin swallowed hard, and Elara, though still silent, nodded once, determined. And so, beneath the whispering stars, a new adventure began. The midnight bell had rung, and its echo had found its way to 3 hearts brave enough to answer. The following morning dawned gray and cold, snow dusting the windowsills and muffling the world beyond. Hogwarts moved in its usual rhythm, students tramping to classes and fires crackling in every hearth. But for James, Elara, and Tobin, the day passed in a haze of anxious anticipation. McGonagall had instructed them to meet her again that evening after supper, and though she had not revealed what their task would be, the weight of it hung over them like an invisible cloak. When the hour came and the hall had begun to empty, they slipped away from their tables and made their way once more to the spiral stair that led to the old headmaster's office. The gargoyle moved without question, and they ascended into silence. Inside, McGonagall waited, standing before a tapestry of a griffin battling a wyvern, her expression as stern as ever. I believe the bell's toll came from a chamber sealed beneath this castle, she said without preamble. Dumbledore called it the Atrium of Echoes, a hidden vault bound by riddles and ancient magic. It lies beyond the reach of ordinary maps and cannot be summoned by any spell known to me. However, Dumbledore left behind clues. Not all are clear, but some point to the places where time once faltered within Hogwarts walls. She turned and lifted a small box from the desk. Inside lay a silver compass-like device, its needle twitching gently though there was no wind. "This is the Path Seeker. It will respond only when all three of you are present and near a passage connected to the atrium. Where it points, you must follow." James leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "And what are we looking for exactly?" "A what?" McGonagall replied. "Who?" She stepped aside and the tapestry shimmered. Slowly, it shifted to reveal a hidden painting beneath. A portrait of a young man in Hogwarts robes, with sharp cheekbones, sunken eyes, and a pale smirk. His arms were crossed, and, though painted in oil, his expression was unmistakably alive. "This," she said, "is Cassian Vire." Ilara's brow furrowed. "There's no student by that name?" "No," McGonagall said softly. "There isn't. Not anymore." Cassian's portrait blinked and turned its gaze upon them. "You've brought children, Minerva? How quaint." McGonagall's lips thinned. "Cassian was a student here long ago. Brilliant, secretive, and far too curious for his own good. Dumbledore discovered that he was meddling with artifacts buried beneath the castle, and one night Cassian vanished. All we ever found was this painting. It showed up in the dungeons entirely on its own." The portrait gave a theatrical sigh. "I never vanished. I simply stepped further than most dared." Tobin took an uneasy step back. "Is he alive?" "In a manner of speaking," McGonagall said. "Bound to this portrait by a curse of his own making." Dumbledore never revealed how it happened, only that Cassian had tried to activate the Midnight Bell once before, and had failed. James crossed his arms. "So what does he have to do with this?" "Everything," said the painting smugly. "Because now, children, the bell has rung once more, the seal has weakened, and the atrium is waking." Ilara narrowed her eyes. "Did you do it?" Cassian chuckled. "Oh no, I'm only a spectator now. But I heard it ring, and if you heard it too, then the door must be opening." McGonagall cut in before they could question further. "Cassian will guide you, though I advise you not to trust everything he says. He can be theatrical, but he cannot lie, not bound as he is." Cassian sniffed. "How dull." "You'll begin in the library," McGonagall continued. "There is a chamber in the restricted section that was sealed even to staff until Dumbledore's final year. You must find your way in. The Path Seeker should react when you're close." The three students exchanged uneasy glances. Breaking into the restricted section was hardly a first-year prank. It was forbidden for a reason. "Do we have your permission?" Ilara asked carefully. McGonagall's expression softened just slightly. "You have my protection, but not my permission. There is a difference, Miss Moore." With that, she handed over the Path Seeker. The device was cold and light in Ilara's hands, its silver casing etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Its needle spun for a moment, then settled, pointing east, toward the heart of the library. The trio set off at once, slipping through empty corridors and past the whispering suits of armor. By now the castle had settled into its nighttime hush, and only the soft flicker of torches and the distant hoot of an owl broke the silence. When they reached the library, the great doors were closed and locked, but James produced a trick wand movement he'd learned from an older student. "Alohomora," he whispered, and the lock clicked open. They slipped inside, moving past row upon row of dark shelves, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and candle wax. A restricted section loomed at the far end, sealed behind a wrought iron gate. Here the books were bound in chains and whispered softly to one another when no one was listening. James held his wand to the lock. "Same trick, right?" Ilara shook her head. "No. This lock is protected with something older. Let me try." She drew her wand and whispered Verilux. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lock pulsed blue and slid open with a soft click. The gate swung inward. Tobin stared at her. "How did you know that spell?" Ilara gave a faint smile. "I read too much." They entered the section, the Pathseeker growing warm in Ilara's hand. Its needle quivered, then spun hard to the right, toward a far shelf lined with tomes written in dead languages. They followed the path the device showed, weaving between the shadows. Then James stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. A faint chime echoed through the silence. A clear bell toll, deep and metallic, as though struck from beneath the stone floor. The three froze. Then the Pathseeker's needle turned sharply downward, pointing directly at the base of the shelf. Tobin knelt and ran his hands over the floor, feeling for any crack or groove. "Here," he breathed. "There's a seam." James joined him and tapped the stone. It rang hollow. Without hesitation, he drew his wand. "Bombarda!" The stone exploded inward, not violently, but with enough force to reveal a narrow tunnel descending into blackness. Ilara looked at the others. "We go down?" "We go down," James said. Tobin sighed. "Of course we do." They climbed into the darkness, one after another, the tunnel sloping steeply. The air grew colder with each step, and far above, the sound of the library vanished. Then, from the depths, came the sound again. The bell, only now it was no longer a chime. It was a summons. The stone passage wound deep beneath the castle, its walls close and rough-hewn, as though carved in haste long ago. The narrow tunnel sloped at an angle that forced them to move slowly, careful not to slip on the cold, damp stone beneath their feet. Their wands lit the darkness with pale, flickering light, casting long shadows that danced behind them like silent watchers. None of them spoke for some time. Even James, whose usual habit was to fill any silence with jokes or bravado, kept his mouth firmly shut. The further they descended, the heavier the air seemed to grow, as though some ancient weight pressed down from above, thick with the echo of forgotten spells. At last, after what felt like an age, the tunnel leveled out and opened into a small chamber of arched stone, no larger than a classroom. The walls were covered in faded carvings, symbols unfamiliar to any of them, twisting runes and interlocking circles that seemed to move slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. At the center of the floor stood a pedestal, and on it sat a stone bowl filled with dark, still water. Above the bowl hung a small brass bell, suspended by an invisible thread. It gave off no light, no warmth, but the sound they had followed, low, sonorous, and steady, came from it nonetheless, tolling in slow intervals like the heartbeat of the chamber. Ilara stepped forward, eyes fixed on the bell. "That's it. That's what we heard." Tobin clutched his wand tighter. "It's not moving. How is it ringing if it's not—" But even as he spoke, the bell gave another toll. None of them saw it move. The sound simply emerged from it, clear and cold, rolling through the chamber and fading into the shadows beyond. James frowned and turned to the walls. "What is this place? A vault?" Ilara stepped carefully toward the runes, holding her wand close. It's a seal. These are containment wards, but layered. I've never seen anything like it." She glanced back at the others, her voice quiet. This place was meant to stay hidden, not just locked away, forgotten. Tobin moved closer to the pedestal, his voice hushed. "Do you feel that? Like something's pulling at you?" James nodded slowly. "Yeah, like something's waking up." As if in answer, the Pathseeker buzzed in Alara's pocket. She drew it out, and its needles spun wildly, then froze, pointing straight at the stone bowl. She stepped back instinctively. "Is wants us to look into the water." "Like a pensieve?" James asked. Alara shook her head. "Not quite. Pensieves are for memory. This feels like something older." Tobin hesitated, then stepped to the pedestal and leaned over. The surface of the water remained smooth, still as glass. Then, as his shadow fell over it, the darkness within stirred. An image began to form, not reflected, but rising from beneath like mist, curling across the surface. They saw a corridor, narrow and unfamiliar, lined with black stone. A door stood at the far end, tall and narrow, etched with the mark of a phoenix in flight, just like the symbol on Dumbledore's old office door. Then the vision shifted, and the door trembled as if something massive had struck it from the other side. The image vanished. James stepped back. Well, that was cheerful. Alara looked thoughtful, her brow furrowed. I think it was showing us where we need to go next." "But where is that?" Tobin asked, glancing around. "That corridor doesn't look like anything I've ever seen in the castle." Before she could answer, the bell rang again, and this time the runes on the wall flared with blue light. A deep grinding sound came from behind the pedestal, and a hidden archway slowly opened, revealing another tunnel beyond, this one smooth and lined with carved bricks. The air that drifted from it was colder still, and carried with it the scent of dust and old stone. "Well," James said, cracking his knuckles, "we've come this far." Alara gave a nod. "We go on." Tobin sighed, but followed them into the tunnel. The path ahead was straight and narrow, and their footsteps echoed against the walls. After several minutes, they reached a set of steps, descending into a much wider corridor, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness above. Tall pillars lined either side, each carved with the likeness of a Hogwarts founder. Godrich Gryffindor with his sword, Helga Hufflepuff cradling a cup, Rowena Ravenclaw with a diadem upon her brow, and Salazar Slytherin, his eyes narrowed in cold judgment. At the far end of the corridor stood a door of black stone, identical to the one they had seen in the water's vision, but it was not unguarded. Between them and the door stood a figure cloaked in gray, its back turned to them. The figure was tall and still, its hands clasped behind its back. James raised his wand. "Who's there?" The figure did not move. Alara stepped forward. "We don't mean to intrude. We're following the Pathseeker. If you're guarding this place, we can explain." The figure turned slowly. It wore no face. Its head was smooth and blank, like porcelain, and in place of features there were only faint impressions, as though a face had been pressed into clay and then smoothed over. Tobin gasped. "A warden." James looked at him. "What? They're in some of the oldest texts. Magical constructs, guardians. Dumbledore mentioned them once in class. They don't speak, they just watch, and if they judge you unworthy, They don't let you pass." The warden stepped forward. A long staff formed in its hands, shimmering into being with a sound like splintering ice. Ilara raised her wand. "We're not here to fight." But the warden did not halt. It pointed the staff at them, and the air around the trio shimmered. In an instant, the stone beneath their feet seemed to fall away, and they were swallowed by shadow. James landed hard on cold ground. Ilara was already sitting up, her wand lit. Tobin groaned nearby, clutching his side. They were no longer in the corridor. They were in a stone arena, circular and vast, surrounded by towering columns. The warden stood high above, unmoving. A voice, unlike any they had heard, spoke from the air itself. "Prove your purpose, or remain forgotten." The stone floor beneath them shifted, and from the far end of the chamber rose 3 doorways, each marked with one of their house symbols. James stood, brushing dust from his sleeves. "This is the test." Ilara nodded. "We go alone." Tobin looked ill. "Why alone?" "Because," she said quietly, "this place was designed to see what we are without anyone else to carry us through." They exchanged one last look. Then each turned to face the path carved for them alone. James approached the arch bearing the Lion of Gryffindor, its crimson mane curling like flame, carved in stone above the threshold. The moment he stepped through, the light of the arena vanished behind him, replaced by a dim, flickering glow that seemed to come from unseen torches along the walls. The corridor narrowed around him, walls pressing close, the air thick with heat and smoke. Somewhere ahead, a deep, rhythmic rumble echoed, a sound like breathing, slow and steady. He gripped his wand tightly and pressed on. The corridor opened suddenly into a cavernous chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness. The floor beneath his feet was scorched and cracked, and in the center of the room, curled upon a nest of molten stone and broken blades, lay a dragon. Its scales shimmered a dull, coppery red, and its tail coiled around the remnants of shattered armor. One golden eye opened as James approached, and a voice filled the chamber, not spoken aloud, but felt inside his mind. "Gryffindor's fire is bold, but boldness without cause burns all it touches." James swallowed, stepping forward despite the tremor in his limbs. "I didn't come to fight. I came to stop something dangerous." The dragon uncoiled slowly, its claws clinking like drawn steel. "Then answer me, flame-born. When courage leads to destruction, do you press on, or do you turn away?" James hesitated. He remembered his father's tales of bravery, of standing against dark magic in the last war, but he also remembered the look in his mother's eyes the night he broke rules just to show off and nearly got a friend hurt. Courage was a flame, yes, but flames could consume. He raised his wand, not to strike, but to signal his answer. "I press on," he said, "but not without thinking. I won't burn what I've sworn to protect." The dragon reared back, smoke curling from its nostrils. Then, with a thrum of ancient power, it vanished in a gust of heat and wind, and the room melted into darkness once more. Ilara, meanwhile, stood before the Raven of Ravenclaw, its wings etched in silver, eyes sharp and still. As she crossed the threshold, the cool air shifted into a library of impossible scale. Endless shelves spiraled upward into a sky of starlight, and books floated gently through the air as though carried by invisible hands. A long desk stretched before her, and seated at its center was a figure cloaked in moonlight. their face hidden beneath a hood. "Knowledge is a crown," the figure said softly. "But every crown is a burden." Elora stepped closer. "I'm not here for crowns. I want to understand what Dumbledore left behind and why it's waking now." The hooded figure gestured, and a single book floated down from the highest shelves. It landed before her with a soft thud. Its cover bore no title, only a question burned into the leather. What is truth when every record is written by the victor? She stared at it, heart racing. The temptation to open it, to see what secrets it held, pulled at her like gravity. Yet she hesitated. "Wisdom is not in knowing everything," she said aloud. "It's in choosing what to trust and what not to seek." The book closed on its own, and the library around her faded, like mist at sunrise. At the same time, Tobin stood before the Badger of Hufflepuff, its round eyes kind and watchful. As he stepped through the arch, the world shifted into a wide field beneath a twilight sky, rows of stones stretching like a forgotten graveyard. The air smelled of turned earth and frost. At the center of the field stood a scarecrow woven from cloaks and twine, but as Tobin approached, it turned, its eyes gleaming with strange light. "You fear you are too small," the scarecrow said, voice like rustling leaves, "that you are nothing without the others." Tobin flinched. It was true. He had always been the background in every story, the helper, the one who saw things too late or not at all. "But even the smallest seed breaks stone to grow," the scarecrow continued. "Will you walk alone when no one sees you and still do what must be done?" Tobin stepped forward, hands trembling but feet firm. "Yes. Even if no one remembers, even if no one thanks me." The scarecrow bowed once, and the field dissolved. In the arena above, the warden watched, motionless. One by one, the 3 doorways flared with light as each student emerged. First James, bruised and sweating, but his eyes bright with something steadier than fire. Then Ilara, her robes dusted with silver ash, gazed distant and thoughtful. Lastly Tobin, quiet and pale, but with a set to his shoulders they hadn't seen before. The arena trembled, and the warden descended, its staff dissolving into dust as it reached the center. The stone door at the far end of the chamber creaked and split open, revealing a hall filled with pulsing light. Beyond it lay the heart of the atrium. The warden raised one arm, and a single word bloomed in the air above them. Who were they? The door opened wider, and beyond the corridor shimmered with a strange golden haze. Together they stepped through. The corridor beyond the warden's trial shimmered like heat haze on sunlit stone, yet the air within it was cool and dry, filled with a faint hum, as though the very walls were humming with restrained magic. The moment James, Ilara, and Tobin crossed the threshold, the heavy black door behind them closed with a deep, echoing thud, sealing them in. Their footsteps rang sharply as they advanced, side by side, wands raised, the golden light ahead flickering like candle flames caught in a storm. The path turned once, then opened suddenly into a vast chamber far grander than any they had passed before. Its roof soared high above them, supported by great pillars shaped like outstretched wings, the ceiling painted with stars that slowly shifted positions, forming constellations that none of them recognized. The floor was an intricate mosaic of glass and stone, depicting a phoenix rising from a storm-tossed sea. Wings stretched toward a blood-red moon. At the center of the room stood a dais, and upon it, suspended in midair by invisible threads of light, hung the midnight bell. It was larger than they had imagined, taller than a man, forged of blackened bronze and etched with symbols that seemed to shift each time one looked away. Around the bell floated shards of broken metal and glass, moving slowly in a perfect circle, as if drawn to it by gravity. The bell was not ringing now, yet it vibrated faintly, a subtle thrum that could be felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. James took a cautious step forward, his voice low. "So, this is it." Ilara nodded, her eyes fixed on the symbols winding around the bell's base. The source, or maybe the lock. Tobin walked slowly along the edge of the dais, frowning. "It's damaged. See there, near the base, a crack." He pointed to a hairline fracture, barely visible against the dark bronze. "Someone's tampered with it." A flicker of movement caught James's eye, and he spun, wand raised, just as a shadow detached itself from the far wall. A figure stepped into the light, a boy, perhaps a year older than them, dressed in Slytherin robes. His dark hair was slicked back, his face pale and sharp, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "Not someone," he said. "Me." James stiffened. "Who are you?" The boy gave a slight bow, mocking. "Thane Rosier, maybe you've heard of my family." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "The Rosiers followed you-know-who. You're a bloodline loyalist." Thane smirked. "And you're very clever, Ravenclaw. But I'm not here to debate history. I'm here to finish what Cassian Vyre started." James took a step forward, wand still leveled. "You've been ringing the bell." "Not at first," Thane admitted. "But once I felt it stir, I knew what it meant. Dumbledore kept this hidden because he was afraid. He thought separating the magical world from the non-magical one would keep us safe, but we've weakened. The atrium can change that. It can restore what was lost when the Statute of Secrecy was passed, reconnect us to the older powers. The bell doesn't just open doors." Ilara glanced at the floating shards, her face pale. "You're trying to bring down the veil between worlds." Tobin's voice was barely a whisper. "That would tear reality apart." Thane's expression hardened. "Only if you lack control. But I've studied virus notes. I've prepared. Once the bell tolls 13 times in full sequence, the barrier weakens, and once it shatters, there will be no more hiding. Wizards will rise. The world will remember." "You're mad," James said, stepping in front of the dais. "We're not going to let you do this." Thane raised his wand. "Then you'll try and stop me. And you'll fail." Before James could answer, Thane muttered a sharp incantation, and a blast of crimson light burst from his wand. James dove to the side, the spell searing past him and smashing into one of the pillars. Ilara ducked behind the dais, returning fire with a flurry of shimmering blue sparks that ricocheted off a shield Thane conjured with a flick of his wrist. Tobin moved to flank, circling around, his hand shaking but his aim steady. The chamber roared with magical energy as spells lit the air in bursts of color. A sudden pulse from the bell, reacting to the conflict, sent a shockwave through the floor, knocking them all momentarily off balance. Thane staggered but righted himself quickly, eyes wild with triumph. "You can't stop it now," he shouted. "The sequence has already begun." The bell began to glow, a dim, unnatural light pulsing from within, as if something inside it had awoken. The room shook again. Above them, the constellation ceiling began to unravel, stars twisting into unfamiliar shapes. Ilara, ducking behind the pedestal, shouted to the others, "We have to disrupt the bell's rhythm. It's following a magical sequence." "Runes carved into the base are guiding it." James gritted his teeth, deflecting another curse. What do we do? Tobin, glancing at the symbols, spoke quickly. The bell resonates with intent. If we channel a counter-intent, protective magic, not destructive, it might interrupt the flow. Ilara nodded. On 3, we cast a shield together, not to block, but to bind. James leapt behind the dais, Thane's next spell narrowly missing him. They raised their wands together, and in unison shouted, Presidium vocum. A shimmering web of golden light burst from their wands, wrapping around the bell in a spiral of runes. The bell trembled violently. Thane screamed in protest and hurled a desperate bolt of dark light toward the trio, but the magic struck the web and dispersed with a sound like shattering glass. The bell gave a final, broken chime, its 13th, then cracked. A soundless shockwave burst from it, hurling Thane across the chamber. He crashed against the far wall and slumped to the floor, unconscious. Silence returned. The floating shards fell, clinking harmlessly to the stone floor. The light faded from the ceiling above. The mosaic on the ground pulsed once with dim silver light, then dimmed. The midnight bell had been stilled. Breathing hard, the 3 students collapsed beside one another, sweat on their brows, their limbs trembling. Tobin looked up at the silent bell. Is it over? Ilara stared at the fracture in the metal. We stopped the sequence. But we didn't destroy it. James turned to her, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. Can it be used again? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Not easily, not soon. But one day, someone might try again. They looked at the bell, the silence around it, now complete. And deep beneath Hogwarts, in the heart of a forgotten chamber, the echo of 13 tolls faded, leaving behind a promise or a warning. It was some time before any of them spoke again. The air in the chamber had grown cold, the shimmer of magic now absent from the stone walls. The midnight bell hung lifeless, cracked and silent, as though the force that had stirred within it had burned itself out. The shards that once hovered menacingly about it now lay scattered across the mosaic floor like broken pieces of a storm. James leaned back against one of the winged pillars, rubbing his shoulder where Thane's spell had grazed him. His voice was hoarse when he finally broke the silence. Well, I suppose that counts as a good night's work. Ilara gave a tired but wry smile as she adjusted her glasses. If your definition of good includes nearly getting turned into spell-charred dust and collapsing an ancient magical seal, then yes, very productive. Tobin was kneeling by Thane's unconscious form, checking to ensure he was still breathing. He'll wake, he said quietly, brushing soot from the Slytherin's robes. What do we do with him? Ilara stood and walked slowly around the dais, her eyes scanning the faint runes that still glimmered in the fractured base of the bell. We take him back to McGonagall. She needs to know everything, not just about Thane, but about the atrium, the bell, Cassian Vire's clues, all of it. James pushed himself up, his legs aching. Let's just hope she doesn't give us detention for blowing up one of the oldest magical artifacts in the castle. I don't think we destroyed it, Ilara said, glancing at the bell with a thoughtful frown. We interrupted it, broke the cycle. That's why the 13th toll was unstable. It didn't finish. And that's good? James asked. I think it bought us time, but if the runes are still intact... She trailed off, her gaze distant. Tobin helped James lift Thane to his feet, slinging one of the boy's arms over his shoulder. I still don't understand all of it, Tobin muttered. The atrium, the veil between worlds, what it was meant to do. Why did Dumbledore hide it instead of destroying it? Ilara walked ahead of them as they made their way back into the corridor of wings, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet. Because some magic can't be destroyed, only buried, and maybe he knew that someone would have to face it again. Someone with a clearer heart. James glanced at her. "You mean us?" She looked back at him, and though her expression remained unreadable, there was a certain weight behind her words. "I think we were meant to find it, or at least to hold it off." The corridor, which had shimmered with light when they entered, was now dark and silent, the strange hum gone. As they passed beneath the arch, the great door opened once more, though more slowly now, as though the castle itself sensed the strain of what had passed. They stepped through into the trial chamber, now dim and still. The warden was gone. No longer did the torches burn with golden flame, and no more did the 3 doors shine. The arena had returned to stone, ancient and forgotten. The place had done what it was meant to do. It had chosen, and now it waited for its next call. The trio climbed the spiral path in silence, the burden of what they had learned pressing down on their shoulders with every step. When they reached the narrow tunnel leading back toward the library, Tobin paused, glancing down the passage. "Do you think anyone else ever made it this far?" he asked quietly. James adjusted Thane's weight on his shoulder and gave a grim smile. "Maybe. But they didn't ring the bell 13 times. We were the first to see what it almost became." They emerged into the restricted section just as dawn's light touched the high windows. The books, chained to their shelves, seemed to watch them in eerie silence. James looked back toward the passage they had left behind, now hidden once more beneath an unbroken flagstone floor. It was as if nothing had ever happened, and yet the silence now carried a different weight, one that whispered of ancient truths and powers barely held in check. Back in Dumbledore's office, McGonagall stood at the window, watching as the sun rose over the distant hills. When the trio entered, half carrying Thane between them, her sharp eyes widened slightly, but she betrayed no further surprise. "You found it," she said, more a statement than a question. James nodded, easing Thane into a conjured chair. "And nearly lost it." Ilara stepped forward, placing the Pathseeker and the cracked shard of the bell's casing on the desk. "He was trying to collapse the barrier between the magical and non-magical worlds. We stopped him, but it wasn't a complete shutdown. The bell is damaged, but the mechanism behind it is still active. It needs watching." McGonagall picked up the shard and turned it slowly in her fingers. So the legend was true after all. The Atrium of Echoes, the Seal of 13. Tobin looked up at her, his voice uncertain. "Why didn't you go yourself? Why send us?" She met his eyes and said, "Because Dumbledore's message was clear. Choose the 3 with care. The path could only be opened by those the Atrium deemed worthy, and I am no longer among that number. The wards would have rejected me before I ever reached the trial." James slumped into the nearest chair. "Well, next time the castle's hiding a doomsday artifact, maybe leave a note." McGonagall allowed herself the briefest flicker of a smile. "If we left notes for every danger Hogwarts holds, there would be no walls left for portraits." She turned to the painting of Cassian Vire, which now hung silent once more. The boy in the portrait had vanished, only the background remained, a blank canvas where once had been a cunning smile and calculating gaze. Ilara noticed it first. "Where's Cassian?" McGonagall's smile faded. "Perhaps. He was bound to the bell's cycle, and now that it's broken, he is gone for good." James frowned. "Or hiding." The headmistress placed the shard back on the desk and looked at each of them in turn. The bell may toll again one day, but if it does, you will remember this. Power is not a birthright, and legacy is not destiny. It is choice, always choice, that defines who we are. She gestured toward the door. Go, rest. Classes will resume tomorrow as usual. James opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. The three of them turned and made their way out of the office, the stone stair winding down before them. Behind them, the phoenix mark above the door pulsed faintly, once, and was still. The sun rose over the grounds of Hogwarts, gilding the turrets and towers in pale gold, and deep below, in the sealed quiet of the atrium of echoes, the midnight bell hung silent, its voice stilled. For now, the days that followed were strange ones. Though the sun shone clear over the towers and turrets of Hogwarts, and lessons resumed with their usual rhythm, cauldrons bubbling in dungeons, parchment rustling in sun-drenched classrooms, owls flitting across the pale spring skies, an unspoken weight lingered in the air for the three who had passed beneath the castle. To others, life continued as it always had, but for James, Elara, and Tobin, the world now felt subtly altered, as though they had glimpsed something behind the curtain that was never meant to be seen, and could no longer pretend otherwise. At breakfast, James still laughed with his Gryffindor friends and elbowed his way through crowds in the corridor, but his glances were sharper, more searching, as though he half expected another Thane Rosier to step from the shadows at any moment. Elara returned to her usual seat in the Ravenclaw common room, head bowed over books, but her questions were no longer drawn from assigned chapters. Now she sought older, rarer volumes, ones that whispered of magical structures older than the Ministry itself, and of rituals abandoned in fear. And Tobin, though still quiet, walked with a straighter spine, his hands less prone to trembling. He had faced the warden's trial and not faltered. The castle had tested him and deemed him worthy, and that knowledge settled in him like the first true breath after a long silence. Word of Thane's incident spread quickly, though few knew the truth. Officially, it was said he had suffered a magical collapse in the library after tampering with a cursed text. A vague enough explanation to satisfy most, and one McGonagall did not correct. He had been removed from the school, escorted by Aurors to St. Mungo's for further examination, and no word had come since. His friends in Slytherin House offered little in the way of protest. Even among them, Thane had kept his secrets too tightly wrapped to earn loyalty. One evening, about a fortnight after the incident, McGonagall summoned the trio once more to her office. The phoenix seal above the door shimmered as they approached, and the spiral stair turned slowly beneath their feet. Inside, the room was quiet, the silver instruments ticking softly on their shelves, and Fawkes's old perch stood empty beneath the window, untouched since the Firebird's departure. McGonagall sat at her desk, spectacles resting on the curve of her nose, her eyes unreadable as always. She waited until they were seated before she spoke. The bell remains sealed. The Path Seeker no longer stirs, and the wards beneath the castle have been reinforced. The artifact will not wake again easily. Elara folded her hands. But it's not over, is it? No, McGonagall said. It never truly is. What you encountered was only one thread in a much older tapestry. There are always those who will seek to unearth the past, not out of curiosity, but for power. And what lies buried does not always remain so. Tobin glanced at the shard of the bell, now encased in glass upon a high shelf behind the desk. If someone like Thane could access the atrium, what's to stop another? That, said McGonagall, is precisely why you were chosen. The bell is a key, yes, but more importantly, it is a test, one that must be faced not with ambition, but with wisdom, humility, and courage. The school itself, its magic, its guardians, it watches, and now it watches through you. James raised an eyebrow. So, we're what? Guardians of the vault now? McGonagall gave a faint smile. In a manner of speaking, you carry knowledge others do not, and responsibility with it. There will be no medals, no speeches, but there may come a time when you are called again. I trust you will be ready. The words settled heavily on them, but not unpleasantly. In each of their minds, the memory of the atrium lingered, not just the danger and fear, but the wonder, the shifting stars, the echo of the bell, the voice of the chamber that had tested their hearts and found them strong. As they rose to leave, McGonagall added, "One last thing. Cassian Virus' portrait remains missing. The enchantment that bound him may have unraveled with the bell's power, or it may have allowed him to escape into the portrait world." James frowned. "You think he's still out there?" Elara turned back. "Or waiting?" "Either way," McGonagall said, "you'll want to keep your eyes open. Magic that binds the soul does not unravel easily. If Vire lives on, even in shadow, he may try to find a way back." The students departed in thoughtful silence. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear above the castle, and the first whispers of night stirred the treetops. The lights of the great hall flickered warmly in the distance, and the sound of laughter drifted through the courtyard. It would be easy to believe that all was as it had always been. Yet beneath their feet, deeper than dungeons, deeper than memory, the atrium of echoes still waited, its ancient stones humming faintly in the quiet. The midnight bell, though cracked and quiet, remained whole. Its 13th toll had been silenced for now, but the magic that shaped it was older than any living soul, and older still than fear. In time, perhaps, it would call again. But so long as Hogwarts stood, so long as students walked its halls and magic whispered through its walls, there would always be those ready to answer. The season turned slowly from the crisp chill of early spring into the warmer breath of May, and with it came the usual rhythm of end-of-term bustle, students chattering about OW+, and NESPS, professors setting more difficult homework, and the greenhouses blooming with life so exuberant that even the venomous tentacula seemed less irritable. Yet for James, Elara, and Tobin, the days passed with a lingering sense of watchfulness, as though the echo of the midnight bell still resounded faintly at the edge of hearing, a reminder that magic did not always slumber easily. They had not spoken often about what had happened beneath the castle. Among themselves there were fragments exchanged, a shared glance when the wind stirred strangely through the hallways, or when the lights flickered in the library where the passage had once opened. But, for the most part, the three had returned to the rhythm of their houses and studies, quietly bearing the weight of what they knew. It was Elara who first noticed the signs. She had been researching magical cartography in the restricted section, seeking information on enchanted topographies and spaces that shifted with the caster's will, when a name caught her eye. Vire C, scrawled in the margin of a battered journal tucked between books on forgotten magical geographies. The reference was brief, but the handwriting was unmistakably old, ink faded to the shade of ash, and mentioned a theory called the mirror threshold, a ritual design meant to allow a magical consciousness, bound to a portrait, for instance, to cross into living minds by means of reflection and repetition. The theory chilled her to the core. She brought the journal to the common room that evening, where the three of them huddled near a high-backed chair beside the fire. The glow cast long shadows across the worn parchment as Alara laid it flat for the others to see. Word. He was preparing a way back, she said, voice low. Even before he vanished, this theory, he may have been working on a way to leave the portrait, not as a ghost, but by merging into someone else, someone who looked into his image too long or too often. Tobin rubbed his arms as though the chill of the hidden chamber had returned to the room. So, if someone found the portrait, or if the portrait found them, Alara said grimly. James leaned forward, brows furrowed. We have to find it before anyone else does. But it wasn't as simple as searching the castle. Hogwarts was filled with hundreds of portraits, many forgotten or obscured in unused corridors and staircases that liked to move. Worse still, the journal hinted that the mirror threshold did not require the subject's portrait to remain fixed. It could jump, using the reflective medium of any enchanted painting or mirror once properly primed. As they debated their next move, the fire flickered, and James looked up suddenly. The surface of the window pane beside them had darkened, not from nightfall, but from within. For the briefest second, a face shimmered there, pale and blurred, its expression unreadable. Then it was gone. Alara sprang to her feet. It's already begun. The following day, they sought out the one person who might have an answer. Professor Everglen, a reclusive wizard who taught advanced magical theory, had spent most of his life studying spells of anchoring and memory binding. He lived in a narrow, lopsided office tucked between the 4th and 5th floors, and when they arrived, he seemed unsurprised to see them. Ah, he murmured, steepling his fingers. You've seen the echoes. You know about the mirror threshold? Alara asked, sliding the journal across his desk. He adjusted his glasses and peered at the page. Vire was a clever boy. Dangerous but clever. He believed that memory was more than a mental construct. It was magical terrain, places where thought, emotion, and spellwork overlap. His idea was to use mirrors as gateways, yes, but not for himself, at least not at first. He wanted to test if a thought could live beyond its caster. James frowned. A thought. Everglen leaned back. An echo, a memory so powerful, so intricately shaped that it could mimic its creator. Speak, think, influence. Not a ghost, not a portrait, a living idea. Tobin's face paled. You're saying Cassian might be a spell now? The professor hesitated, then nodded. If he succeeded, it would explain why his portrait vanished. He no longer needs a frame. He's seeking minds. There was a long silence. Then Alara asked, how do we stop him? Everglen tapped the journal. He would need a point of anchorage, a mirror attuned to him, something he used often, possibly created himself. Find that mirror, and you might trap him again, or at least weaken his hold. The hunt began that very evening. For the next several days, the trio scoured the castle. They searched forgotten storage rooms and empty classrooms, crawled behind tapestries, and even bribed Peeves with a set of trick wands to keep his poltergeist eyes peeled. At first they found nothing, but then, late one night as they were passing a long, unused corridor near the old divination tower, Tobin stopped. I've never seen this mirror before, he said, pointing to an ornate frame hanging crookedly on the stone wall. Its surface was dull, fogged over from within, though no dust lay upon the glass. The frame was carved with twisting vines and tiny runes, too faint to read, too old to be mere decoration. James stepped forward. Let's see if this one has a ghost in it. Ilara stopped him. Wait. They all stared at the glass, and slowly, within the murk, a figure appeared. Not clear, not solid, but there. A young man with high cheekbones and pale eyes. He did not smile. Ilara's wand was already out. That's him. The mirror trembled. Then the corridor began to warp, stone stretching like pulled parchment. The torches along the walls flickered and dimmed, their lights swallowed by a rising darkness from the mirror's heart. Cassian Vier had found his doorway, and the real trial, it seemed, was only just beginning. The corridor twisted around them like a serpent coiling in slow motion, the very stone of Hogwarts groaning as ancient wards strained against the presence that now pressed through the glass. The mirror pulsed with a soft, dreadful glow, its surface no longer a simple pane of reflection, but a moving veil, rippling with a silvery mist that coalesced into the figure of Cassian Vier. His eyes, sharp and cold, peered at them as though through a great depth of water, and his mouth curled into the faintest ghost of a smile, not of warmth, but of recognition. Well met again, the voice murmured, though his lips did not move. The sound echoed inside their heads, as if the mirror spoke not with breath, but with memory. You have done well to come this far, but the bell was never the end, only the beginning. James took a step forward, wand raised, but the air between them and the mirror shimmered like heat above a fire. He could feel it against his skin, a boundary that was not solid, yet repelled like glass. You don't belong here. You were bound. Cassian's gaze moved to him, thoughtful, amused. Bound? Once. But you saw to that, didn't you? The 13th toll. You cracked the shell. You woke more than you meant to. Tobin's voice was quiet, but resolute. You're not alive. You're not even you anymore. You're an echo. A reflection, Cassian replied. Yes, but reflections remember. And what I remember is that the world chose silence when it should have shouted. It buried knowledge, locked away power. Dumbledore believed that would keep it safe, but safety is not the same as wisdom. Ilara stepped forward now, her wand steady, her eyes unflinching. You're trying to step into someone, to take a mind. Whose? Cassian did not answer. Instead, the mirror darkened and the corridor grew colder. A wind, though from where it blew none could tell, stirred their robes and carried with it the scent of damp stone and something older, fouler. The walls around them shimmered, and for an instant Hogwarts itself seemed to shudder. Choose, said the voice, colder now. One of you, a vessel, or I take what I need. James's wand blazed with red light. Not likely, but Cassian was not asking permission. The air thickened, heavy as water, and the stones beneath their feet lit with runes. Some they recognized from the chamber of the midnight bell, others stranger still, more jagged and volatile. The mirror brightened with a sudden pulse, and a shockwave knocked all three of them back against the walls. Ilara hit the ground hard, stars bursting behind her eyes. When she looked up, the mirror had begun to spin slowly in place, hovering above the stones, drawing the darkness inward. Shadows poured from the edges like ink, crawling across the floor toward them, reaching with tendrils that whispered their names in voices too soft to bear. Tobin scrambled to his feet, muttering spells beneath his breath, protective charms, memory wards, but the shadows twisted through them as if they were cobwebs. We need to break the mirror, he gasped. No, Ilara said, rising shakily. It's an anchor, but it's also a door. If we break it while he's halfway through, he could scatter, possess anything, anyone. James fired a blasting curse at the shadows, but they merely parted and reformed. He turned to Elara, face pale with fury. Then what do we do? She looked at the mirror, then at the runes, and a sudden clarity came to her. Sharp, dangerous, and terrifying. We trap him. But not like before. We have to cast a binding circle, not on the mirror, around it, and one of us has to hold it in place from the inside. Tobin's mouth opened. That's mad. Whoever's inside won't come back, Elara finished, her voice even. Not unless we find a way to unravel the threshold from the root. James turned sharply to her. You're not going. I'm the only one who can. I know the ruins. I've studied Vire's work. I can hold him. You too can seal it. Tobin shook his head violently. No, there must be another way. But the shadows were almost upon them, and the mirror spun faster now, its surface gleaming like the skin of a storm. Cassian's shape loomed large within it, no longer merely a reflection, but something half emerged. His fingers pressed against the inside of the glass, warping it like jelly. James stepped forward, lips tight. Then, I'll do it. Elara caught his arm. No, you'd fight. You'd try to force it. And that's exactly what he wants. He feeds on pride. Let me. Their eyes met, and in that look, past all the things they did not say. The trials faced, the choices made, the truth that none of them were the same children who had first heard the bell's echo weeks ago. At last, James gave a stiff nod. Together they drew the runes, Elara etching the final symbols as the others chanted the binding words. The circle flared, lines of light wrapping the mirror in a cage of fire and frost. The corridor shook as the mirror screamed, not with sound, but with pressure, a force that ground against their bones and teeth and will. Elara stepped into the center, her wand raised, eyes closed. Now, she cried. The circle sealed. The shadows vanished. The mirror froze. Within, Cassian's figure slammed against the inside, a silent roar on his lips. Elara stood at its center, her face calm, her body still. The light consumed the glass, and then, with a final pulse, the mirror darkened. The corridor returned to silence. Elara was gone. For a long moment, neither James nor Tobin moved. The corridor lay in breathless stillness, the runes at their feet now mere faint scars upon the stone, the mirror dark and inert, no longer a veil but a slab of lifeless glass. The last echoes of Elara's voice had faded, and in their place lingered only silence, deep, unforgiving, and final. James slowly approached the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, distorted slightly by the warping of the surface, as though the glass remembered what it had just become. He raised a hand to it, fingers barely grazing the cold, unyielding pain. "She's in there," he said at last, his voice raw, cracked by smoke and grief. Tobin stood behind him, pale and trembling, his wand still drawn, though there was nothing left to fight. He stared at the circle of runes they had inscribed, now flickering weakly like dying embers. "She knew what it would take," he murmured. "She knew, and she went anyway." James clenched his jaw. "She'd bought us time, maybe more." They did not speak again as they lifted the mirror carefully from the wall. Though it resisted at first, groaning as if its weight was more than mere glass, It finally yielded, and together they carried it back through the winding corridors, up through the floors of the castle. No portrait spoke as they passed. No torches flickered to life. It was as though Hogwarts itself mourned. When they reached McGonagall's office, the spiral stair opened without a word, the gargoyle moving aside with a solemn groan. The head mistress was already waiting, her face unreadable, standing behind her desk as they entered, with the mirror between them. She said nothing at first, only extended a hand to touch the surface. A faint vibration met her fingers. No sound, only a ripple of power, quiet and constant. "She's holding him," James said quietly. "In the seal. In herself." McGonagall nodded once, the movement tight as if carved in stone. "Then the threshold is closed. For now." They placed the mirror in the center of the office, upon a circular pedestal McGonagall conjured with a tap of her wand. Spells of warding, protection, and concealment wrapped around it one by one, layer upon layer, each glowing briefly before fading from sight. As the final charm sealed, the glass no longer reflected the room. It remained dark and still, like a window shuttered from within. James watched it, silent, unwilling to turn away. "I can bring someone from the Department of Mysteries," McGonagall offered. "They have vaults meant for this kind of containment. Ilara would not be forgotten." James shook his head. "She isn't forgotten. She's in there. Alive. Somehow." Tobin looked down, voice low. "And if she's alive, then we can find a way." McGonagall did not correct them. She did not speak of the danger of false hope, nor the difficulty of undoing spells that bound the soul. Instead, she moved to her desk and opened a drawer. From within she drew a thin journal bound in blue dragon hide, the very one Ilara had used to keep notes since their first foray into the restricted section. She handed it to James. "Chin left this with me after your first journey below, in case something went wrong." He opened it with shaking fingers, finding the pages filled with runes, sketches of magical structures, hypotheses in neat, curling script. At the very end was a single line written in a firmer hand. "If I vanish, do not stop. If I am trapped, find the lock. There is always a way back. E.M." Tobin looked over his shoulder. "She planned for this. She believed in this," James said, voice steadying. "In us." The mirror did not speak. It did not shimmer or cry out. Yet as the boys stood before it, the surface grew a shade lighter, just for a heartbeat, like the hint of a candle flame behind thick glass. Then it faded again, and all was still. The days that followed were heavy with strange quiet. Word of Ilara's disappearance spread slowly, cloaked in uncertainty. Officially, she had been sent home due to illness, though those who had known her well spoke of her absence with a kind of hush, as if afraid to name what had happened. Ravenclaw Tower kept a light burning in its highest window each night, though no one could say who lit it. James and Tobin returned to their studies, but not as they had before. Every free hour was spent in research, in corners of the library untouched by others, in conversations with older students who knew of forgotten rites, in letters sent in secret to magical scholars far beyond the reach of Hogwarts walls. They were looking for something few believed could be found, a way into the mirror threshold and a way back. They kept Ilara's journal close, copying her notes, expanding them, daring to dream what others feared to try. Beneath the weight of grief, they found purpose, and with it came the strength to endure. The mirror remained in McGonagall's office, sealed and warded, but never locked away. Each morning the headmistress stood before it for a moment before beginning her day, and each evening James and Tobin passed by it on their way to supper. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the light was low and the castle quiet, the surface would ripple gently, like wind brushing across a still pool. A whisper of magic, somewhere beyond reflection, Alara waited, and somewhere within shadow, Cassianvire dreamed of freedom once more. Summer came to Hogwarts with a sky full of light and the scent of blooming wildflowers drifting through the open windows. The black lake shone like polished obsidian under the sun, and the forbidden forest stirred with slow, drowsy rustlings. Lessons dwindled as the end of term approached, and students turned their thoughts to exams, holidays, and home. Yet amid the usual rhythms of laughter and last-minute essays, the shadow of what had passed lingered, softened by time, but never entirely gone. James spent many hours on the edge of the lake, parchment spread across his lap. Ilara's journal open beside him. He traced her notes line by line, rewriting them in his own hand, not only to understand them better, but to preserve them, to carry on what she had begun. His temper, once quick as a wand flash, had tempered into something quieter, more watchful. He no longer filled silences with noise. Instead, he listened closer than before to the castle's murmurs, to the words between words, to the small signs that magic left behind. Tobin, too, had changed. His nerves had not vanished, but where once they had paralyzed him, they now sharpened his focus. He had become a quiet force in the background of the school, observing, recording, connecting dots others didn't even see. His talent for magical detection had grown uncanny. Twice he warned professors of approaching magical imbalances in classrooms, and once he caught a cursed quill before it could harm an unsuspecting first year. He never sought credit, but word spread all the same. Together, the two of them pursued every lead they could find, in secret corners of the library and in whispered conversations with portrait guardians and house elves. They uncovered fragments of lore surrounding mirrors, reflections, and magical thresholds. From a scroll hidden in a tower archive, they learned that the ancient arcanists once believed reflections could trap not only light, but time itself. From a portrait of a long-dead magical philosopher, they discovered a theory that souls suspended within mirrored dimensions could communicate through dreams, if tethered by memory strong enough to breach the veil. James began keeping a dream journal. Most nights it held nothing more than scraps of nonsense. A classroom full of singing frogs, the astronomy tower upside down, his mother wearing Professor Sprout's hat. But on a Wednesday near the solstice, he woke breathless, heart pounding, and found one line scrawled in his own hand before he had fully opened his eyes. "The lock is not in stone, but in the name you do not say." He showed the entry to Tobin, who stared at it in silence for a long while before speaking. "She's reaching us." Another dream came a week later. This one was clearer. James stood at the center of a forest where every tree bore a mirror in place of bark. A girl stood before him, her robes drifting like smoke, her eyes sharp and knowing. She did not speak, but when he woke, the scent of elderflower lingered in the air, and his hand was clutching a scrap of parchment not his own. It bore a single rune, the same sigil that had once glowed at the base of the midnight bell. The next day, James and Tobin returned to McGonagall's office. She met them with her usual composure, though her eyes flicked to the mirror on its pedestal with unmistakable gravity. They presented the parchment, the dream, the line from the journal. When she had examined them all, she said nothing for some time. At last, she turned to the mirror and whispered a spell neither of them had heard before. The surface shimmered faintly, and for a breathless moment it seemed as though a light stirred within. "I believe she has bound herself more deeply than we thought," McGonagall said quietly, "not simply as a prison, as a lock." Tobin blinked. "A lock for what?" "For Vire," she said. "If he is to rise again, it would be through her. And if she is holding him, then her soul is wrapped in the seal itself." James stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "So how do we bring her back?" McGonagall looked at him gravely. "Not by force. This will not be a matter of power or cleverness. The seal was written in sacrifice. To undo it, you must offer something equal, not in might, but in meaning." She conjured a parchment from the air and handed it to them. "This is the last spell Alara wrote before her descent. It is incomplete, but she had begun crafting it from the ruins of the bell's enchantment, reshaping it to preserve rather than bind. It is not a key, but it might be a door." For the next 2 weeks the boys worked in secret. They rebuilt the spell one line at a time, testing it with fragments of light, reflection, and memory. Tobin, who now understood the fine threads of magic as few students his age ever had, aligned the runes with painstaking precision. James, whose strength had always lain in the heart rather than the mind, poured memory into the spell. Every moment they had shared with Alara, every laugh, every fear, every victory. The spell took shape not through calculation, but through connection. On the last night of term, as fireworks from the end-of-year feast burst in the sky above, they returned to the headmistress's office. McGonagall stood waiting, wand in hand, her face as grave as stone. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the silver instruments and the low hum of the mirror, which pulsed faintly with anticipation. Tobin placed the spell upon the pedestal. "It's ready!" James faced the mirror and whispered, "We're here. Alara, if you can hear us, hold fast." The spell ignited. Light, soft as starlight and sharp as shattered glass, poured into the frame. The runes carved around the base of the pedestal lit one by one, forming a circle of golden fire. The mirror rippled once, twice, and then parted, not like breaking glass, but like the surface of water. For the first time in weeks, they saw her. She stood in the center of a storm of swirling silver, her hands raised in silent concentration, her robes fluttering with unseen wind. Cassian's form, no longer whole, loomed behind her like a shadow stretched too far. Alara turned toward them. Her mouth moved. They could not hear the words, but they understood. Not yet, but soon, the image in the mirror held for only a moment. Alara, suspended in the silver current between realms, looked not afraid but resolute, as though she had become a part of the magic itself, a guardian shaped by sacrifice. Behind her, the shadow of Castian Vira clawed at the boundaries of the seal, his form distorting and recoiling as the spell James and Tobin had crafted pushed him further back, away from the edge of release. His face twisted in fury, but there was no sound, no voice. Only the hiss of unraveling magic as the binding rune at the mirror's center flared with light. Then the surface quivered, the starlight dimmed, and the mirror's glow faded to stillness once more. The reflection vanished. The room fell silent. James let out the breath he had not realized he'd been holding. His wand arm dropped to his side, his fingers tingling from the force of the spell. He turned to McGonagall. "We've reached her. She's still there, still fighting." The headmistress gave a slow nod. And you've done more than that. You've reinforced the boundary, reshaped it. What you've created isn't just a barrier, it's a bridge. It connects us to her. Tobin rubbed his temples, still dazed by the spell's intensity. But she's not free. No, McGonagall agreed, but she's not lost either. That matters. The mirror now bore a new mark, one neither carved nor burned, but present all the same, a circle of light barely visible, like the first shimmer of dawn in dark water. It pulsed faintly with the rhythm of a heartbeat, slow, steady, enduring. McGonagall conjured a silver case and gently placed the spellwork parchment within, sealing it with a whisper. We will store this alongside the mirror. It is her tether and your promise. James glanced at the case, then back at the mirror. We'll keep working. There must be a way to bring her out entirely. McGonagall's gaze was steady. And you will. But you must take care. Magic this deep listens to more than words. It listens to intent, to memory. The wrong spell, the wrong emotion could open the gate to him instead. Then we'll be sure, Tobin said firmly. We'll be ready. The school year ended quietly for the three of them. The train ride back to London was long and reflective, filled not with idle chatter, but with silent resolve. While others spoke of summer holidays and Quidditch scores, James stared out at the countryside slipping past the window, his thoughts full of mirrored light and old runes. Tobin scribbled notes into a fresh journal, already outlining new theories, new pathways, new safeguards. Back at King's Cross, James's mother pulled him into a tight hug, sensing something changed in her son. Something deeper than maturity, something born of fire and choice. He hugged her back just as tightly, but said nothing of the mirror, of the bell, of the girl suspended in magic and shadow. Some truths belong to the old magic of the world, to the halls of Hogwarts, and to the hearts of those who carried its burdens with quiet strength. Letters passed between them all summer, coded, careful, threaded with references only they would understand. Tobin discovered a lead about ancient Celtic mirror wards etched into burial stones in Cornwall, while James learned of a former unspeakable living in retirement near Inverness who had once spoken of magic that fed on memory. McGonagall, ever silent on matters not suited for Owlpost, sent only one message. The light still pulses. She holds fast. In the heart of the old school, beneath its highest tower and above its deepest vaults, the mirror stood still upon its pedestal, silent yet vigilant. Its surface remained unchanged by dust or time, its edge bound in 1,000 layers of protective enchantments. And each night, when the torches dimmed and portraits hushed, the mirror shimmered, once like a breath held and released. Ilara waited within. Cassian Vyre, though weakened, remained a presence, his echo bound but not erased. What strength he still had gathered in the deepest parts of the mirror realm, feeding on forgotten fears and fractured thoughts. But Ilara stood between him and the breach, her will a gate stronger than stone. And far above, in the coming years, others would walk the halls of Hogwarts, never knowing the full tale of the Midnight Bell or the girl who gave herself to hold back the dark. But 3 would remember. 3 would watch, and when the bell's echo stirred again, when the veil rippled once more, they would answer, for the door had not closed. It had only begun to open.